All right. Hi, Mom and Dad. A few supportive friends and some amazing random people on the internet. Your presence is very well received. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Welcome to Weekdays with Fatih. You're tuned into Heads and Tails. Since my last guest was running a podcasting agency, this made me think about our show from a business perspective. And if we're in the business of storytelling, we might as well understand podcasting and storytelling, right? Okay. So podcasting, as you know, are growing in popularity, as are audiobooks. In publishing, trends come and go, but this love of all things audio may be indicative of a sea change. Audio is a sector of industry that has been steadily growing with no signs of stopping. Here's a look at some important moments in audio history that have led to the boom that we're seeing right now. There are general timelines for audiobooks and podcasts separately, but I think to completely separate the two is a mistake. We'll do a deep dive into the history of audiobooks and podcasts and a timeline of how the phonograph went from its invention to being used as a medium for audiobooks for the blind and to the massive content channel today we call podcasts. Today, podcasting is a several billion-dollar industry that has sold books, mattresses, expensive flavored sodium, yes, I'm looking at you, LMNT, united celebrities, and helped people out of prison. Well, at least one. Shows range from household names like This American Life to niche podcasts like Living Being, which, as the name suggests, is all about beekeeping. Simply put, podcasting is huge. But it wasn't always. There was once a day when this esoteric form of quote-unquote audio blogging or online radio was only for the diehard early adopters. I will share you everything you need to know about podcasting history, along with some predictions for where the podcast industry is headed. All right, we need to consider the days we started recording sound to have a well-rounded understanding. The original phonograph was invented and patented by Edward Leon Scott in 1857. He called his device the phonograph, and he patented the invention on March 25th of 1857. The purpose of this invention was to evaluate acoustics rather than playback sounds in music. Spoken word recordings first became possible with the invention of the phonograph by Thomas Edison in 1877. The phonographic books were one of the original applications envisioned by Edison, which would speak to blind people without effort on their part. Many short spoken word recordings were sold on cylinder in the late 1800s and early 1900s. However, the round cylinders were limited to about 4 minutes each, making books impractical. Flat platters increased to 12 minutes, but this too was impractical for longer works. One early listener complained that he would need a wheelbarrow to carry around talking books recorded on discs with such limited storage capacity. Into the early 1970s, the beginning of the modern retail market for audiobooks can be traced to the wide adoption of cassette tapes. Cassette tapes were invented in 1962, and a few libraries, such as the Library of Congress, began distributing books on cassette by 1969. Audiobooks on cassettes allowed public libraries to easily purchase audiobooks for patrons to check out. This caused rapid growth for audiobook sales and publishers. By August 1988, there were 40 audiobook publishers, up from about 10 in 1984. So that's a 4-time increase in 4 years. 20 years ago, Amazon's Audible released the first portable audio player designed specifically for listening to audiobooks. It cost around $200 and could only hold about 2 hours of audio. Today, readers can listen to hundreds of hours on their smartphones and choose from more than 35,000 books published each year on dozens of applications and devices. More than 67 million Americans now listen to audiobooks annually, according to the Audio Publishers Association. In the early 1970s, a Dutch engineer began developing a new audio storage medium that would eventually become the compact disc. The goal was to create a medium that could store high-quality audio in a small, durable package that was immune to the degradation that often affected vinyl records and cassette tapes. This engineer's work eventually caught the attention of Philips, a Dutch electronics company that was interested in developing a new audio format. In collaboration with Sony, Philips began developing the technology that would become the compact disc. The first prototype CD was produced in 1979, and it was quickly recognized as a major breakthrough in audio technology. CDs could store up to 74 minutes of audio compared to the 20 or 30 minutes that could be stored on cassette tapes. Additionally, CDs had much higher audio quality with a much lower level of background noise and distortion than vinyl records or tapes. The capability to podcast actually began in 2000 with the website myaudio2go.com, which offered users audio-only broadcasts of sportscasts, the news, and so on. The website itself didn't really last long. Before podcasts were invented at the turn of the 21st century, people had already been experimenting with video blogs and internet radio shows. But in 2003, software engineer Dave Weiner developed an audio RSS feed for former The New York Times reporter and public radio host Christopher Lydon, who used this new RSS feed to offer audio content of notable interviews on his blog. Yes, podcasting was in fact developed in 2004 when Adam Curry, former MTV video jockey, and software developer Dave Weiner coded a program known as iPodder, which enabled them to download internet radio broadcasts to their iPods. Curry now hosts the Daily Source Code, the true first and one of the most popular podcasts on the internet. It featured insights on Curry's everyday life and events in the podcasting space, covered general news, and played music from the PodSafe Music Network. Technically, Radio Open Source by Christopher Lydon was the first podcast launched in 2003. However, the term podcast wasn't coined yet. That term was coined by The Guardian columnist Ben Hammersley and pioneered by Curry. He was writing about the potential for a boom in amateur radio, arguing that the ingredients were all there: blogging, popular production software, cheap MP3 players, all that rage. But what to call it? Audio blogging, podcasting, guerrilla media? I think we all know which one stuck. The same year, the very first podcasting platform, Libsyn, was born. It was in 2005 that big companies started recognizing the opportunity. Apple leading the way with iTunes 4.9, the first update with native support for podcasts. George W. Bush became the first president to have his weekly address delivered as a podcast. Also, a fun fact, 2005 is also the year in which podcasts is declared Word of the Year by the New Oxford American Dictionary. During a keynote speech in 2006, Steve Jobs demonstrated how to make a podcast using GarageBand. This would have been a sign to all competitors that the medium was to be taken seriously. The popularity of podcasts was on the up and up, with Ricky Gervais setting a Guinness World Record for most downloaded podcasts, over 250,000 per episode for the first month. Fast forward a few years, and Adam Carolla becomes the Guinness World Record holder for the most downloaded podcast. He only managed to accrue 59 million unique downloads between March 2009 and March 2011. Measly. By 2013, the demand was undeniable. Apple announced 1 billion podcast subscribers. This was also the year in which Personal Audio patent trolls sued several high-profile podcasters for royalties, claiming that they had patent on podcasting since 2009. This was only overruled in 2017 when the court ruled that they did not, in fact, invent the medium. So in 2014, two big shows that would add to the snowball effect, turning into an avalanche. These two shows were called Serial, which was about serial killers, and This American Life, hosted by Ira Glass, which is one of my favorite shows. This was a radio show before that turned into a podcast. 2015, there was a presidential podcast. Obama was interviewed. So, as you may have noticed, for the past 20 years, since Apple made it mainstream, podcasts took a turn to be very, very advertisement-oriented, because they're extremely profitable for companies to use these popular personalities or quote-unquote experts to sell their products. In our last episode, my guest was running a podcasting agency, so that should give you an idea about how this has turned into an industry. Enough space for everybody. Now, let's take a look at the industry in numbers. There are over 464 million podcast listeners worldwide, which is projected to reach 504.9 million by 2024. So how big is the podcasting industry worldwide? It turns out it's an over $23 billion industry as of 2023, but this growth is projected to increase to over 100 billion before 2030. Well, how many podcasts are there even? As of February 2024, there are currently 3.2 million podcasts. That said, exact figures can vary significantly depending on several factors, most notably the inclusion of inactive podcasts. There are 460,080 active podcasts currently on Apple Podcasts as of October 2023. That's a pretty impressive number, but it is worth noting that almost half of them have only 3 or fewer episodes. So as you can see, the longer you go, the less competition you have. This is why the gorilla of the podcasting world, Joe Rogan, is such a huge success. He's been at it since December 2009. In May 2020, after an intense courtship, Spotify announced a licensing agreement to host Mr. Rogan's show exclusively. Although reported then to be worth more than $100 million, the true value of the deal that was negotiated at the time, which covered 3.5 years, was at least $200 million. The new deal is reportedly worth up to $250 million, the journal reported, a significant increase from Rogan's first exclusive deal with Spotify. The future promises an unforgettable symphony of stories, an auditory adventure for generations to come. Playing a part in this symphony is challenging, as, unlike music, it's pretty damn competitive. But it's exciting at the same time. Sharing people's stories from all around the world is my passion. Thank you so much for educating yourselves with me. I'll see you on the next episode.